Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are again, another weekend show with Mr. Dickson. And firstly, apologies for the delay. We had a bit of an unexpected incident in the studio when it should have gone out last weekend. All resolved now, and that incident will remain a secret, never to be shared by myself, Stephen and Salem. So that opens up a little bit of intrigue and interest, I'm sure. But anyhow, Steve, lovely to have you back, mate. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you for the second or third time this week. And it was lovely to see you in person earlier this week, Chris. What a treat that was.
Yeah, likewise. Really nice. Lovely meeting. Nice to see people again. And thoroughly.
And a cracking spot of lunch.
Yeah, and thank you very much for that. It was lovely.
Pleasure.
Steve, now, all of us have had a bit of travel, Salem included.
We have.
Yep, Salem came back from Germany with Ryanair.
He did. He was just explaining to me about his journey.
I was in Ireland and I was on Stenna line, Fishguard Rosslare, and I've got to say, absolutely incredibly brilliant service. Like clockwork, everything was superb. Automated, had all our information off our registration number. And I think one of the things that we need to talk about is you get a lot of people now debating whether or not there's too much queuing, there's not enough queuing, there's not enough checking, there's too much checking. But I think we just need to clear a lot of that up. I mean, a lot of it is risk-based.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think the discussion that Salem and I was just having before was just around actually what happens when you submit your information on the PLF, or what happens when you record your test, or what happens when you book your day two, etc. I think it's fair to say, Chris, that it's very similar to what happens with, or what a lot of the public think is that the UK does not have outbound immigration controls. Let me just confirm that myth is completely false. The UK does have outbound immigration controls. It's just that they are invisible. And they are electronic outbound immigration controls, which means that that whilst there are no physical desks, which you can see they put in place during high risk or severe threats and so on, you can see that the officers do attend and they'll stop you on exiting the country. But generally speaking, the UK has not had an outbound border control for the last 30 years. Why? Because the airlines are responsible for submitting the EPS data from your passport to the to border force, to the immigration, which is the same way in which the US does its outbound immigration controls. Unlike many other countries in the world, I would actually say most other countries in the world, which do have physical presence and stamp you out as well as stamping you in. It's similar story here, Chris. When the PLF was introduced, that's the passenger locator form. When the passenger locator form was introduced, goodness knows, probably more than 12 months ago now. It was a dumb form. It wasn't very intelligent. The fields had to be all populated manually, and that was because the boffins or the tech whizzes hadn't yet sort of got the integrations together with the other systems in border control. That's changed an awful lot in the last 12 months. It now links to to your EPS details on your passport. It also will link to the test provider to make sure that the information that you're putting in is correct and registered. And therefore, the combination of a PLF, a test entered into the system, will allow you now to use the e-gates, for example, on arrival. Whereas before, the e-gates were not in use. People complaining, why are the e-gates not being used? And then some people complaining, well, they need to check all the documents. I'm okay to stand in line because they should be checking all the documents. What's happened now is they've pushed the checks up line or upstream. The checks now, the physical checks are done by the airline. It is the airline that is responsible for checking you have a PLF and a vaccine, or you meet the required criteria. And on arrival, if all of that works, then you can use an e-gate. If you can't, or there's no PLF in the system, or there's an anomaly, as I had, of course, typically on Sunday. I hold two passports. I think that's the issue. So I think the system gets a little confused. But maybe I got confused using the wrong one. That could also be the issue. It's now the airline that takes responsibility in the same way as they do with the Carriers Liability Act, which pushes responsibility on them to have things like passengers have check they've got visas and such on in place. So I think that the level of checks now is commensurate, as you say, with the risk. When there were very few people traveling, it was easy to check all the documents. As we get the more vaccinated members of the public who are traveling and are subject now to green conditions versus amber or red, the risk profile obviously reduces significantly, and therefore Border Force have, in their infinite wisdom, which doesn't exist all the time, done the right thing by pushing the checks upstream, pushing the responsibility onto the airlines, albeit, but allowing customers to flow much more freely through the e-gates. The problem comes is at the end of the summer holidays, when you have thousands upon thousands of families arriving with children under 12 who are not permitted to use the e-gates, and they were suffering waits of 3, 4, 5 hours at the weekend. I was in from Malaysia, and I was out. I landed at 13:05, and I was out in the car at 13:45.
Yeah,
nothing to be said is wrong with that.
No, and I agree. And you know, there's so much now unnecessary debate and discussion. And you were talking about there about the vaccinations and how the numbers are going up. I mean, we've both had much calmer, more level-based discussion than you hear, you know, on some of the shows and some news, and also in the press about the vaccination issue. But I mean, everybody's got to get the vaccination levels up as high as possible. And I was interested now to listen and a couple of stories there about what China are doing now, Steve. So they expect, you know, to keep curbs on international flights throughout the first half of 2022. So, and mainly because of the vaccination levels. So, you know, and China being such a big exporter of tourism, and especially into, you know, into Asia. I mean, that's all going to take a long time to come back now. So it's going to be a lot slower.
Well,
slower than the States.
I'd say, yeah, the Chinese travellers are very welcome in the UK. Also, Chris, as you well know, they are big spenders when they're here. The Chinese, the Japanese typically will spend significantly amount more on their travel, on their hotels, on retail, restaurants, and so on when they're here. Therefore, they're a big loss to, you know, whilst we've got people traveling, and it's lovely to be back in London and see people moving around. And, you know, you and I were out the other day having a lovely lunch, and I was out for supper last night and had a nice dinner, and it was great to be around people again. But it typically still is limited to Europeans, I see, and maybe that'll even be further limited to knocking off the Yanks on the head as well, because they haven't played ball and they've not opened up their borders to us. So I'm all for a reciprocating same action here, although that will damage once again the North Atlantic travel, which of course is so important to some of the premium carriers, particularly the likes of IAG, Lufthansa, Air France, etc. here. Yeah, and showing clearly in the share value as well, which is such a shame. Yeah. But look, I think vaccines. I mean, we're seeing. I mean, even Australia. You know, the Hermit Kingdom itself has come out yesterday. Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, saying, well, it's last night our time. It's actually today, Friday, Australian time. Saying today from Canberra that they will now allow the individual states to determine when the borders can open for those states internationally. It is very foreseeable, therefore, that when New South Wales or Victoria, who are edging up now towards, you know, decent numbers, reach 80%, that they could be welcoming international travel back from a limited number of destinations from as early as November. Now, it's foreseeable that the states like WA or South Australia, for example, or Queensland, where Madame Palaszczuk, with her comrades, will continue to keep the Queenslanders locked up. It's very foreseeable that somebody from New South Wales could travel overseas and visit their aunt or their uncle or their mother or father in the UK before they could visit their sons or daughters in Queensland, for example. I mean, that is perverse.
I know.
That is the way that things are now moving.
It's madness, isn't it? Absolute madness.
But it's great to see Australia finally realizing that when you're at the arse end of the world, you know, there's only so much you can rely on domestic tourism, domestic travel. And the Aussies themselves, I mean, they're great travelers, Chris. I lived in Australia, as you know. I have loads of Australian friends. They all travel overseas once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times per year. I mean, they are regular, vociferous travelers who like to get out of Australia. And a lot of us like to get into Australia, neither of which we're able to do since March last year.
Yeah, no, it is. It's madness how people's initial strategy or tactics then get carried over and get just go on far too long and far too much in the wrong direction without having a little review. But touch wood, hopefully things will get better. Now, a little bit of good news. Ryanair, okay, so they've had some fantastic results now, and they've beat August passenger number forecast. So that's brilliant. And Michael O'Leary himself, said that he's on track, to fly 100 million passengers this year, with monthly numbers expected to hit just over 10 million for each of the next 3 months. So that's great news, really good. And I'm over the moon with that. I think.
Yeah, finally. I mean, I think, we said airlines like Ryanair and Wizz Air, not had a mention for a while.
They haven't, but Joseph didn't send us a cap or anything. So, we'll have to keep reminding him.
I think, Chris, if you spoke to anybody that knows Joseph, you will find that he's on form. So we shouldn't feel left out by the lack of action. Look, with the likes of Wizz Air and Ryanair, EasyJet to a lesser extent, I think, but certainly Wizz and Ryanair will be able, Chris, to quickly pick up the slack from where some left off. Interesting, the likes of Gatwick Airport has now continued to go ahead with its second runway plans, which is another bit of great news. But also at Gatwick, they're getting the new IAG subsidiary to replace British Airways short haul. That was always a problem for them at Gatwick. The cost base at Gatwick were way out of kilter with their competition. Key competition there, of course, being EasyJet. And so the advent of I was calling it BA Light. I'm not sure if that's what will be used, but BA Light at Gatwick, obviously with a new AOC and different TNCs, will probably be welcome news to Gatwick as well. So there is some broader light there. But the dichotomy is, whilst we still have the slot protections, Chris, and the alleviation that continues through winter into winter 21. I've forgotten what year it is. It's 2021, right?
Yes. Will be for a little while, another year.
But the slot alleviation continue through to the end of the winter 21 schedule season in March 2022. That will not play into the hands of the likes of Gatwick Airport Limited, who as the operator will be absolutely wanting to welcome the likes of new capacity from Ryanair, EasyJet, or others to fill the gaps of a very cautious, conservative British Airways, for example, who now can be alleviated from the A320 rule. So there's some challenge still, I think, to go through, but I think the alleviations will persist, and I think on balance, probably for good reason, I think on balance, but it does prevent a little more adventurous airlines like Ryanair, as you mentioned, from capitalizing fully on what capacity could be available to them.
Yeah, but it's amazing when you see some of the numbers and the way they respond so quickly. I mean, like there's an article here saying that they're roughly equating 14 new London routes equaling 500 more jobs, which is great, for the city's airports. But also the fact that they've got a staggering 142 routes from the English capital city. I mean, that's incredible. It's amazing.
Well, I think it'll be very welcome to many, not just those in aviation, but also outside and around to wherever these destinations are. I think people want to get flying again. It's very clear this pent up demand that was suppressed or frustrated for a period of time is now that claw is pulling it right back up again. And as talk of another lockdown, dissipates. As we move on, which is very good news for most. Although I think there's still some people out there that not go lockdown, Chris. They don't really like the prospect of everything opening up. Oh, this is all too fast. Oh, I can't deal with it. Oh, I'm a nervous Nancy. And I just think you've got to get over it. You've got to get back to life. If you don't want to get back to life, that's fine, darling. You stay at home. But the rest of us will be carrying on.
Yeah. No, but the point you made there about the speed now at which things can return is going to cause problems in itself. But these new routes from London, they're going to Finland, Romania, Sweden. There's a couple of Finland, couple of Italy, Croatia. Then there's a couple to Spain from Luton, France, Italy, back to Shannon in Ireland, Turin in Italy, and then they're going to do the Gatwick, Malaga. So I mean, it's amazing what they're doing. I'm so impressed with the way they're responding and as quick as they are.
But Chris, I'm not, because that's what they've always done really well. And I've always been a big admirer of Ryanair. I worked for EasyJet for many years, but I'm a big fan professionally of Ryanair as an organization, and I think Ryanair's response has been exemplary. I like what Michael O'Leary says. You'll not be surprised that I'm one of his. I'm not very critical of Michael O'Leary in terms of his public position on most things.
Yeah.
I think they've done the right thing. They've done exactly what they always want to do, which is what O'Leary said from the beginning. To be fair, let's try and capitalize on this crisis, and we saw Wizz Air doing that in the early days, Chris, last year. In June, July, August last year, we saw Wizz Air putting capacity into markets that they'd never operated before. I was in Abu Dhabi this week, and I saw the Wizz Air Hungary aircraft when I was on the ground. I'd forgotten that Wizz Air, in the midst of all of this, had launched an operation in the UAE.
Yeah.
Now they were both parked up with their doors closed and no steps on, so I'm not sure that was bodes entirely well. But they've done both Ryanair and Wizz Air, I think, have capitalised on opportunities that others have passed up, Chris.
Yeah, no, that's right. And again, Mr. O'Leary is very, very vocal with regards to scrapping the PCR tests for fully vaccinated arrivals, which makes sense.
Well, I think that does make sense now. I think as we've gone through this, the risk profile has changed as we've had a very low levels of vaccination in community. PCR test probably did make sense. Yeah. As we increase the levels of vaccination, then probably PCR tests are a lever that would only be used, I suspect, after a positive LAMP or antigen test.
Yeah. I agree with that as well. And he's also, requesting the suspension of the APD, which has to be paid for every departing passenger. So he's very. I think he's very direct, but I think he also makes a lot of sense.
Always.
Yeah. No, he's good. He's a good man. Now you mentioned Wizz Air. And Wizz Air are also now, they're introducing the COVID-19 vaccination for crews. We were talking a few weeks ago as well about, what some airlines and what some parties are doing. So, you look at Delta imposing $200 monthly surcharge on unvaccinated staff, Saudi banning all unvaccinated passengers from domestic flights. You've got Wizz Air doing this. We've spoken about many other carriers who were promoting that as they seen it positive element, of making sure all the crews were vaccinated. Now, again, we've got differences of opinions every now and again, which is healthy, but I think it's right, Steve.
I think it's wrong, Chris.
That's why I was talking about we have differences of opinions every now and again. I didn't mean like within the next 20 seconds, but yes, we disagree.
So once again, just to clarify, before people come down and start bashing me for my view, it's not that I would not be encouraging. It's not that I would not be trying to advocate that the best thing everybody can do, whether you're air crew or you're Joe Blogs on the street, everybody should get a bloody vaccine. It's very clear, very simple, and I'll do everything in my power to try to encourage that. It's interesting, Chris. I would say that those countries that have got particularly strong values on privacy, sharing of medical records, and liberties, not one country on that list, not one airline you mentioned exists in a European Union state, does it not?
Yeah.
And therefore, and I'm not sure Hungary you can call a really sort of standard example of a democracy, by the way, with its current dictator Orban Viktor. So I think there is a challenge to be had. I suspect there will be some elements or pockets of legal action against employers for doing so. I think the penalties is interesting, or the surcharge from. I mean, what is it? Is this just is this a lever that they're trying to use to discourage people, that you're going to get fined $2,500 a year as an employee for not vaccinated? I mean, these are dystopian things, Chris.
Yeah.
That do not bode well, particularly in a country, remember, like America, that thrives on the knowledge from medical records. So, if one has had COVID or one has not had COVID, at what point do you say, well, I don't want to be vaccinated because, or I cannot be vaccinated because I have an underlying condition, which is, some immunosuppressant issue or some other issue with your body. At what point does that then sort of encroach into personal sharing of personal records that somebody could well capitalize on? And you lived in the US, you know how that works, Chris, entirely. So I think it is a very dangerous place for companies to go. As I say, not one European airline has gone down this path. They are encouraging, they're advocating, they're pushing, they're trying to get the message and get vaccinated, but not one of them has enforced. And that, in my view, is the right thing to do.
As always, mate, as always, I love to listen to your opinion, even if I agree with it or disagree with it. But I think one interesting factor, when you and me were going into the restaurant that we were in on Wednesday.
Yeah.
We both picked up on the amount of CCTV and also the facial recognition that was on the entrance into that particular restaurant. I mean, Steve, anybody in London, and we spoke about this at the table. I mean, they're in one of the most highly populated CCTV monitoring cities in the world.
Yes, they are. And I've got nothing to hide. And therefore, why should I be worried by it?
Exactly. And again, what you were saying about the countries that haven't made such an issue, to a degree, their hands are tied because everybody is worried now about what to say, what to do, what can you push, what can't you push. And I think that's also something that needs to be curtailed as we move forward, because it's crazy. And we were talking earlier in the week about poor old Gareth Southgate, and I was thinking to myself, of all the things that man has done wrong, or people see it as being done wrong, from missing that infamous penalty, to then the great things he's done with the English team, to then making the decision with the three young lads who then ended up losing that particular final. The thing that he received the most vitriolic and damning of criticism and threats and everything was because he agreed to support a pro-vaccination advert. Mm-hmm. And I just think, Steve, as well, like what you're saying about, people's rights, the anti-anything sometimes come across more damaging than the people who are just trying to get things done in the first place. And I think that's a worrying trend.
Well, that's right. You look at the damage that was caused this week.
They get away with it.
They get away with it. Look at the damage it was caused. I mean, so the last few days, out my window here sits Lambeth Bridge.
Yep.
Sits Vauxhall Bridge, then Lambeth Bridge, and then Westminster Bridge. And on every bridge, bar none, this week, when I've been walking around or driving around town, yep, there's at least a dozen police officers at the end of each bridge. Why is that? It's because they're there to prevent Extinction Rebellion from blocking off any more key arteries or key routes in and out of the city.
Yeah.
And it is a rather bizarre thing that what they've got to do is use police officers, very, very valuable police officers, who could be doing other things that are of greater priority than blocking a group of, as far as I'm concerned, Extinction Rebellion are yobbos and louts for the most part. They don't stand. In fact, they stand in the way of the message, I believe, of good environmental governance and good approach to solving the environment with the climate crisis. And look at what they've done, the damage that they've done to the water fountain in Buckingham Palace with paint and water that have to be drained away, that losing valuable water. I'm just thinking, you people they paint the roads, they leave their shit everywhere, the rubbish on the streets, and with all their fancy nose piercings and their purple hair and their naked torsos walking down the street. I mean, it's appalling. And they think that is to call attention to this crisis. So in your view, yes, I think what is being done, Chris, is actually more damaging than the cause itself. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, but people are too frightened to say what's right, Stephen. what makes sense, not
Some
necessarily.
people.
Said right. Yeah. Now, another thing
One thing you or I would never be afraid of, Chris, is to tell people what we think is right.
That's true enough, mate. True enough. And then another topic that we spoke about, Steve, was Alitalia. They're stopping operating as of the
Phoenix rises from the ashes.
as of the 15th of October, I think it is. But then you've got another public company. You've got ITA taking it over, and they're selling tickets from the they were selling from the 26th of August, and the government's also put 100 million euros aside to back up any refunds coffers. So it's I mean that has been so long.
Well, one of the commentators this week said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, but they said, look, if there was to be a disastrous event on Earth, that wiped everything and everyone off the planet, there'd only be two things left. One would be the plastic bottles, the plastic waste that remains for hundreds of years, and the second one would be Alitalia.
Yeah.
Because it seems no matter what happens, Chris, the Italian taxpayer is lumbered with that behemoth, useless organization that nobody has been able to tame the beast, and quite criminally, I think, for the Italian state and the Italian taxpayer. If I was still living in Emilia Romagna, as I once did, I would be livid that taxes were still being paid to Italy. But I don't pay any taxes to Italy any longer, so I'm less of a personal interest. But I do have a professional interest, which is when they're competing against the carriers that do not have the same level of state support. Now, that state support is both tangible and intangible. There's two very different sort of elements of support. One is the cash driven, and the other is all the general politicking that goes on with supporting and encouraging and bilaterals and rights and so on and so forth, right? But when they're up against the likes of EasyJet, Ryanair, etc., you do sort of feel that this is completely unsustainable, and that something has to give. But I don't think anything will ever give. I mean, the aeropolitical agenda should have dealt with this a long time ago. It never has, and I doubt that it ever will.
Yeah, no, you're right, Steve. You're right. Listen, you mentioned about the police earlier. I've got to give a big shout out for the Welsh police coming back off the ferry. We had all the electrics went in our car, and it just stopped. It was the most amazing thing that happened, and the car we didn't even get off the inside lane of the A321, and there was a police officer just finishing duty, and he was going the opposite way. He flashed us, and then he went up and he came back and he stayed with us until another officer who was coming on duty came, and then there was another one, and the three of them, I've got to say, absolutely incredible. And the car was in such a dangerous position. We were very, very concerned, and they were absolutely brilliant. So I think people are too easy to criticize, but when something goes wrong where you really need their help, you really appreciate how good they were. We had several ambulances pass by, flashing to see if everything was okay. I mean, absolutely amazing. Emergency services we got in this country are incredible, and they are so undermanned. It really...
And undervalued and underpaid.
Undermanned, underpaid, undervalued, and it is such a shame. And, how good would it be for something to come out of this poxy last year and a half to make people care for what's important and correct that, which would be brilliant.
Well, I hear you, Chris. I've had some dealings with the police in my time, mostly professional, very rarely personal. But I have to say the personal dealings that I have for the most part are, I see the lads and the ladies here next to the US Embassy who look after that monstrosity. It's my next door neighbor, and they are exemplary. I mean, really, absolutely fantastic. Really, very, very good indeed. And no, I hear you. I mean, I see that these poor buggers standing on the side of the street, we're waiting for somebody to block the bridge. I mean, that's just a waste of taxpayers' money and a waste of their time, and they feel surely undervalued by that. In the same way that they did have the police these ridiculous COVID restrictions last year, where you couldn't lie down in Battersea Park without getting a shadow of some officer over you, which I got once or twice, asking me to kindly move on. It must have been as ridiculous for him to enforce that as it was for me to be moved on.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Plus the secondary request of, would you please cover up, sir? Now, last thing I want to ask you about, right? And I'm most definitely not the brightest bulb in the chandelier by any means, but what I cannot understand, Steve, is this Afghan issue and the amount of equipment that has been left behind. Now all this PR with various parties, wearing the American uniform and flashing the equipment. How on earth, in any walk of life, can you do such a thing? I just don't understand it.
Well, I think the political leadership in the US is the weakest presidency we've ever seen in a century, probably, or more.
But to leave,
and if the political, but Chris, if the political leadership dictates to the generals or dictates to the defense forces, who are completely culpable in this decision making, you have to ask the question about the quality and the credibility of the political leadership, who would normally have these advisors sitting next to them, Chris. I mean, I don't know. I've not sat in a situation room in the White House, but I suspect that he's surrounded by pretty smart, capable military advisors. I mean, that seems a logical expectation. And therefore, I can only suspect either that the military has just had its fill. It's had it up to here of dealing with a shite for the last 20 years, which I can completely understand. But I don't think that any decent general or any decent military commander, Chris, could condone or endorse the actions of the Biden presidency in the way in which they pulled out. And therefore, if they were giving a task and they were given a deadline and there was some heated dispute and debate in the White House, I can only imagine it was get out at all cost. Now, let's hope that is for better gain, Chris, or for bigger global security benefit for the world. I'm not sure there is, but I suspect there's some secret deal that we don't know about, nor should we ever know about, by the way. But I do suspect that the advice fell on deaf ears. Maybe Biden was asleep. I saw him asleep talking to the Israeli Prime Minister this week. Amazing that this 78-year-old clown is in the White House. I'd much prefer a 74-year-old yellow buffoon, but we've got a 78-year-old clown instead. So no surprise there, Chris, at all. I do feel certainly now that the UK and Australia and other forces were left in a predicament that just was not theirs. They could not, without the spine or without the backbone of a strong military leadership that the US brings, I doubt they could last more than a few days on their own. So regrettably, we saw the images that we did with the Taliban wearing beautiful uniform, well kitted out. I mean, the lads look great. I have to commend them on their grooming. They look fabulous. But to see them sitting in Apaches or C-130s, it was 27Js. There was all sorts of stuff there. I mean, it was phenomenal.
But Steve, like I said, I've got a couple of granddaughters now, and I can imagine them at school and having even at the very, very early days of school, and somebody saying, or I mean, it's not going to happen, but if a teacher came out and said, this is what happened, and the history lesson here now, and there was, whether it's 50, 60 or 70 billion pounds worth of equipment was left, some child is going to say, well, why did they not spend that money on preventing things in the first place? And also, what about all the lives that have been lost as a result of going in there? What sort of feeling do the families of those
absolutely
see when they see that
horrendous
60 billion has been left behind?
Yeah.
And any economics or any business, you'd be thinking, my God, what could we have done with that up front?
Yeah, totally agree.
And when things like that happen, you just question so much. I think anyhow, it beggars belief.
Well, only three and a bit years to go. Is it 3.5 years to go until we get Biden? I'm not sure he'll survive. I'm not sure he'll survive that long. And I don't think Harris will be there either. She's an utterly useless piece of work as well. Who I thought would have been his conscience on all matters when it came to dealing with ethnic minorities or women's rights, and she's just been completely silent. She laughs when she's asked about Afghanistan. What an embarrassment for the United States. If you thought Trump was an embarrassment, good Lord, this Democratic leadership takes some beating.
Yeah, no, I think they've damaged themselves, and it's amazing how quiet he's been.
Well, depends how you interpret that. Let's see what. I'm always nervous if Trump is quiet. I mean, I don't know what's going to come out, but quiet doesn't suit him normally. So that it makes me equally nervous, I think.
Yeah, no, it's absolute madness. And then again, let's end on another high note. You know, UK like Jet2 ordering 36 Airbus.
Fabulous.
Neos.
They're great news. Big bloody nose for Boeing. That's great for Airbus. Their orders just keep going through the nose. So that's great. Boeing will be more disappointed because, of course, Jet2 is a Boeing operator today. But they've not been able to get the MAX program back on track and not be able to give the confidence to operators. Airbus is pricing at those volumes, and Airbus pumping out, that number of aircraft off the assembly line. Their unit pricing now. That what the Airbus has got much more flexibility in terms of the deals they can shape and craft with the carriers. Good news for the UK as well, given that a large amount of that airplane is made here. So that's great.
That's good news. And then to finish with, obviously, anybody who's a Tottenham supporter, Mr. Kane remains, and those that are Manchester, either left or right. I think.
Well, actually,
a romantic tale there with Ronaldo coming back, and I think he's going to do fantastically well.
It's great. I would say for any Arsenal fans, we feel your pain. But Chris at Brentford 7th,
mate, eh? 7th heaven. They're doing well.
Great stuff. Have a wonderful weekend, Chris. Lovely to catch up with you. Such a sublime conversation, and I shall speak to you next week.
Yeah, look forward to it, Steve. Take care, mate. All the best.
Cheerio.
Cheers.